Two friends, same age, same city, same $40,000 saved up. One buys a rental property, the other puts everything into index funds. 20 years later, both are wealthy. But one of them spent hundreds of weekends managing tenants, dealing with emergencies and losing sleep. The other spent those weekends doing whatever they wanted. Here's what nobody tells you in the real estate versus stocks debate. Both sides cherry-pick the numbers that make their argument look good and bury the ones that don't. This video does something different. We're running every number honestly, including the ones that don't make it onto YouTube thumbnails. By the end, you'll know exactly which investment suits your actual situations. Let's create a fair comparison. Meet Priya and David. Both are 32 years old. Both have $40,000 saved. Same income, same city, same starting point. The only difference is what they do with that money. Priya uses her $40,000 as a down payment on a $200,000 rental property. She secures a 30-year mortgage at 7%. Her monthly mortgage payment is about $1,300. She finds a tenant paying $1,700 per month. On paper, that's $400 per month in cash flow. Priya feels smart. She drives past her property on the way to work and thinks, I own that building. David puts his $40,000 into a total market index fund. He sets up an automatic monthly contribution of $300 and genuinely doesn't think about it again. Nobody at his office is impressed. There's no building to drive past, just a number on a screen that quietly grows. This psychological difference matters more than most people realize, and we'll come back to it. But first, let's run the actual math. Year 1 to 5. Where the fantasy meets the spreadsheet. Priya collects $20,400 in rent. Her mortgage payments total $15,600. That leaves $4,800 in apparent cash flow. Sounds good, but here's what the thumbnail never shows. Property taxes, roughly $3,000 per year. Insurance, $1,400 per year. A water heater replacement in year 2, $1,100. A plumbing issue in year 3, $2,000. 1 month of vacancy between tenants, meaning $1,700 in lost income plus $500 to relist the property. After 3 years of real costs, Priya's actual net cash flow is somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000 total. Not per year. Total. Over 3 years, on a $40,000 investment. But here's what David doesn't have. Leverage. Priya used $40,000 to control a $200,000 asset. After 3 years of property appreciation at 3 to 4% annually, that building is now worth roughly $220,000. Her equity has grown to about $45,000 to $55,000. A significant portion of that equity came from the bank's money working for her. That is the single biggest structural advantage real estate has over stocks, and it's the reason this comparison is never simple. By year 5, Priya is living the full reality of being a landlord. Let's talk about the costs that almost never appear in the real estate influencer's spreadsheet. Vacancy. The average rental property sits empty for roughly 1 month per year. That's a full mortgage payment with zero rent to cover it. And every tenant transition means cleaning costs, repair costs, relisting fees, and your time. Maintenance. Budget 1 to 2% of the property's value annually for upkeep. On a $200,000 house, that's $2,000 to $4,000 every year. Some years it's Amanor repair. Other years it's a $6,000 HVAC replacement you can't delay because it's summer. Capital expenditures, roofs, furnaces, and water heaters are guaranteed future costs that arrive in large chunks. If you're not setting aside money monthly for these, you're not running an investment. You're running on borrowed time. Property management. If Priya hires someone to manage the property, that's 8 to 10% of monthly rent gone. Around $140 to $170 per month. If she manages it herself, she's working a part-time job she's not getting paid for. Problem tenants. A tenant who stops paying and knows the eviction process can cost 3 to 6 months of lost rent plus legal fees. That single event can erase an entire year of profit. None of these appear in the $400 per month cash flow number. All of them appear in the actual bank account. Quick favor before we get to the 10 and 20-year numbers. If this is already showing you things the typical real estate versus stocks video skips over, hit that like button and subscribe for more honest financial breakdowns. And comment the word funds below. I'm sending a one-pager with the full comparison numbers to everyone who comments. Let's keep going. Let's see the scoreboard. By year 10, Priya's property is worth approximately $280,000 to $300,000. Her remaining mortgage balance is around $160,000. Her equity sits at roughly $120,000 to $140,000. Her actual cash-in-cash return, after all real expenses, has averaged 3 to 5% annually. Not the 15% she described to friends at the beginning, but real compounding equity exists. David's portfolio, with consistent $300 monthly contributions, is sitting at approximately $150,000 to $170,000. Total money he put in, about $86,000. The rest is compounding growth. 0 hours managing anything. At year 10, they're surprisingly close in total wealth. Priya might be slightly ahead because of leverage. But Priya also spent hundreds of hours managing her property, took on $160,000 of remaining debt, and concentrated her entire investment in one building in one neighborhood. David owns tiny pieces of thousands of companies across every industry and geography. Same approximate wealth, completely different risk and effort profiles. Year 20. Year 20 is where the numbers become genuinely interesting. Priya's property is now worth roughly $370,000 to $420,000. Her mortgage is either paid off or nearly done. Her equity sits between $350,000 and $420,000. After 20 years of maintenance, repairs, taxes, vacancies, and insurance, her total net cash profit above what she spent is somewhere between $40,000 and $80,000. David's portfolio at 10% average annual return with $300 monthly contributions has grown to approximately $380,000 to $430,000. Total contributions over 20 years, $110,000. Everything above that is pure compounding. No debt, no tenants, no 2 a.m. phone calls. At year 20, they're in the same range, $350,000 to $450,000 each. But here's the critical insight. If David had simply increased his monthly contribution by $150, from $300 to $450 per month, his 20-year portfolio jumps to $500,000 or more. In stocks, adding money multiplies your compounding base. In real estate, adding investment usually means a second mortgage and doubling your workload overnight. This video would be dishonest if it only covered real estate's weaknesses. Let's be equally clear about where real estate genuinely wins. Leverage is transformative. Priya used $40,000 to control $200,000 in assets. David used $40,000 to control $40,000. That 5-to-1 leverage ratio is the primary reason real estate creates more millionaires than stocks in most wealth surveys. When the asset appreciates, you're earning returns on the full value, not just your down payment. Tax advantages are real. Property investors can deduct mortgage interest, property taxes, maintenance costs, and depreciation. That depreciation deduction is remarkable because you can deduct the theoretical wear on your building even when it's actually increasing in value. Stock investors don't have an equivalent. Inflation protection is built in. As prices rise, so do rents and property values. A property bought today becomes relatively cheaper to service over time as rents increase while your mortgage payment stays fixed. And cash flow, when the math works, is genuinely valuable. A well-chosen property in a strong rental market generates income every single month regardless of what the stock market is doing. The key phrase is when the math works. And the math only works when monthly rent is at least 0.8 to 1% of the purchase price. On a $200,000 property, that means $1,600 to $2,000 per month minimum. In many expensive cities, that number is impossible to hit today. Equally, let's be honest about where stocks fall short. Volatility is brutal. In 2008, the total market dropped approximately 37%. In March 2020, it fell 34% in weeks. If David had $200,000 in his portfolio and watched it become $130,000 in a month, that's genuinely painful. And data shows most retail investors panic and sell at the bottom, then buy back in after recovery, turning a temporary loss into a permanent one. There's no monthly income in most index funds. Total market funds yield roughly 1.5% to 2%. That doesn't replace a paycheck for most people. And there's no leverage. David controlled $50,000 with $50,000. The multiplied returns from borrowing simply don't exist in standard index fund investing. So, who should choose what? Choose real estate if you have local market knowledge, time to manage a property actively, a high tolerance for illiquidity and unexpected costs, and access to a market where the rent-to-price ratio genuinely supports positive cash flow from day one. Under those conditions, real estate is exceptional. Choose index funds if you want simplicity, diversification, and liquidity without management time. You want to scale wealth without adding complexity or debt. You prefer to sleep soundly during market volatility. Under those conditions, index funds will build comparable or superior long-term wealth with a fraction of the stress. Bottom line, real estate wins when the math works, you have the time, and you treat it like a business. Index funds win when you want simplicity, compounding, and your weekends back. Both can build serious wealth. The question isn't which one wins on average. The question is which one fits your actual life. Subscribe for more honest financial breakdowns. Hit like if this gave you a clearer picture than the typical thumbnail version, and share this with anyone trying to make this decision. Drop a comment. Are you team real estate, team stocks, or are you doing both? And don't forget to comment funds to get the one-pager comparison. See you in the next one.